Welcome back to Garden Talk, brought to you by the Penn State Erie County Extension Master Gardeners. And again, today I'm your co-host, Mike Bailey, and Ellen DePlacido is with me. Good morning, Ellen.
Good morning, Mike.
Hey, the last two times we've talked about some random pollination things, okay, which I hope everybody found useful. But this time around we're gonna go back to the garden, okay, and we're gonna talk about pollination in the garden and see how some of those things that we mentioned kind of fit into this practice of actually gardening. So when you look at your garden, there are some vegetables that need pollination, some vegetables that don't, right? I suspect. Yeah.
That's correct.
So,
Yeah.
when you talk about plants that don't need pollination, now, did you ever think about it in that way? So, when you think about what you grow, okay, does the lettuce really need to be pollinated? Does the spinach really need to be pollinated? What about the chard? What about the pak choi? What about the collards? What about broccoli? No, we eat the flower, or we eat the flower buds. Same with cauliflower. And cabbage certainly doesn't need to be pollinated, nor does Brussels sprouts, right?
Right.
What about some others, Ellen?
Well, there are potatoes, things like potatoes.
Yeah, you're right, potatoes.
Yeah. And some of your basic root crops, or maybe all of your basic root crops like onions, leeks, carrots, beets, radishes, you don't have to worry about making sure that they are pollinated. They're going to produce, right? And this might not be a complete list, but it's some of the routine vegetables that are grown in the home gardens that we don't worry about pollination so much.
Ellen, that's quite a big percentage of
It is.
the plants that we grow in our gardens, in our vegetable gardens, that really don't need, pollination, and that's really not even a complete list.
Right.
But what about some of the other things that do need pollination? And how is this pollination accomplished?
Okay. Well, plants that need pollination can really accomplish this in primarily three different ways. The first one is being self-pollination. What that means is that the flower on these plants are what we call complete flowers. In other words, that flower contains both the male and female component. And these components are situated in such a manner that the pollen from the male flower can easily drop onto the female structure, which is the pistil, with a very slight, very vibration or breeze, or maybe you and I walking through the garden and doing a little bit of work and we brush by them, and that pollen, falls from the male to the female flower. So they don't really need a vector like a bee or an insect to transfer that pollen. And some of these examples are our most common ones and the ones that you'll find in most vegetable gardens, and that's your tomatoes and your peppers, your eggplants, beans, peas. Those are the primary ones. I don't know if you can think of any other ones at this point, Mike.
Well,
I think those are the ones we're most concerned
yeah,
with.
those are the ones we're most concerned about. And I think a lot of
Right.
people are really going to be surprised that you mean to tell me my tomatoes, okay, don't need an insect for pollination. That's correct. In fact, the tomato blossoms don't even produce any nectar. So when a bee or another insect visits a plant, visits a flower, they're looking for two or three different things. They're looking for some pollen, and they're looking for some nectar. And
Nectar.
believe it or not, those tomato flowers don't even produce any nectar. And it's the same with the pepper plants. Okay, they don't need any kind of a vector. They're self-pollinated. Eggplants. Go out and take a look at your beans or your peas. Take a look at the blossoms. Take a look at that flower, how convoluted that flower is. Okay? And to think that, okay, fine, I'm going to have, an insect visit these things and do the pollination. No. Insects may very well visit your tomatoes and your peppers and your eggplants and your beans and peas, but they're really not vital to the pollination and to the fruit development, on these things. So, some people, I used to do bees, and one of my neighbors was all happy because he says now he's going to get more tomatoes, and I didn't have the heart to tell him. I just let him go, okay, with that, okay, fine, thank you, but doesn't really work that way. So whatever, what about these plants requiring a pollination vector. We talked a little bit about those in the last couple of
Yeah.
sessions, didn't we?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, in that cucurbit family, and that's where most of
Right.
these things
Most of these
fall.
are. Yeah.
Um, so these are the plants where we have what this something called an incomplete flower. Ellen, is that right?
Right. It's an incomplete flower, and what that means is that the flower would either contain a male component or a female component, but it's not going to have both in the same flower. And this means that the pollen is going to have to be carried from a male flower to that female flower by some vector. And by vector, we mean like a bee or some other insect that is actually looking for the nectar that's in that flower, because there is nectar in that flower, and it provides them some sugar and some nutrients. And so, like Mike said, the plants that fit into that category include our cucurbits, like our cucumbers. It includes zucchini, summer squash, pumpkins, melons, your vining crops. I don't know if there are other plants that you want to mention at this point, Mike.
No, I think that pretty well covers it. And you're right. The other
Mm-hmm.
vining crops, okay. Some people have some watermelon in there, and et cetera, and stuff like
Right.
that. So,
Cantaloupe, something like
cantaloupes,
that.
yes.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
but the important thing, I go back and I chuckle about the little story we ended the last session with, that fine gentleman who was cutting off the
Cut
man,
off all the male flowers.
cutting off the male flower. Um, they serve a purpose. They're very much needed. Okay, in that
Hmm.
particular situation. And again, the other thing that you mentioned during the last session was some of these flowers are not open for very long. It was only a 4 to 6
Right.
hour window, and if it's
Yeah.
not a good day for a pollinator to be out and about because it's rainy or
Hmm.
stormy, that
Heat.
it's you're right. That's not going to get pollinated. You're going to get some misshapen fruit because you're going to have minimal pollination or no pollination at all, and some of these things might actually shrivel up on you. But don't worry about that. You're going to get more blossoms, and the plant will be healthy. And again, the female blossoms can be identified because they got a miniature fruit just down below
Hmm.
the blossoms, whereas the male blossoms do not have that. So, Ellen, I think we've used up our time for today. So, thank you
Okay.
for listening, and we're going to pick up on this topic. We're going to talk about wind pollination next time around. Okay? Thank you now.
Okay. Sounds
Thank you.
good.